obtained without loss of time, and Miss Nickleby and her mamma went off in quest of Mrs. Wititterly, of Cadogan Place, Sloane Street, that same forenoon. Cadogan Place is the one slight bond that joins two great extremes. It is the connecting link between the aristocratic pavements of Belgrave Square and the barbarism of Chelsea. It is in Sloane Street, but not of it. The people in Cadogan Place look down upon Sloane Street and think Brompton low. They affect fashion too, and wonder where the New Road is. Not that they claim to be on precisely the same footing as the high folks of Belgrave Square and Grosvenor Place, but that they stand with reference to them rather in the light of those illegitimate children of the great who are content to boast of their connections, although their connections disavow them. Wearing as much as they can of the airs and semblances of loftiest rank, the people of Cadogan Place have the realities of middle station. It is the conductor which communicates to the inhabitants of regions beyond its limit the shock of pride of birth and rank, which it has not within itself, but derives from a fountain head beyond. Or like the ligament which unites the Siamese twins, it contains something of the life and essence of two distinct bodies, and yet belongs to neither. Upon this doubtful ground lived Mrs. Wititterly, and at Mrs. Wititterly's door Kate Nickleby knocked with trembling hand. The door was opened by a big footman with his head floured or chalked or painted in some way, it didn't look like genuine powder, and the big footman, receiving the card of introduction, gave it to a little page, so little indeed that his body would not hold in ordinary array the number of small buttons which are indispensable to a page's costume, and they were consequently obliged to be stuck on four abreast. This young gentleman took the card upstairs on a salver, and pending his return, Kate and her mother were shown into a dining room of rather dirty and shabby aspect, and so comfortably arranged as to be adapted to almost any purpose, rather than eating and drinking. Now, in the ordinary course of things, and according to all authentic descriptions of high life, as set forth in books, Mrs. Wititterly ought to have been in her boudoir, but whether it was that Mr. Wititterly was at that moment shaving himself in the boudoir, or what not, certain it is that Mrs. Wititterly gave audience in the drawing-room, where was everything proper and necessary, including curtains and furniture coverings of a roseate hue, to shed a delicate bloom on Mrs. Wititterly's complexion, and a little dog to snap at strangers' legs for Mrs. Wititterly's amusement, and the aforementioned page to hand chocolate for Mrs. Wititterly's refreshment. The lady had an air of sweet insipidity, and a face of engaging paleness. There was a faded look about her, and about the furniture, and about the house. She was reclining on a sofa in such a very unstudied attitude, that she might have been taken for an actress all ready for the first scene in a ballet, and only waiting for the drop curtain to go up. "Place chairs." The page placed them. "Leave the room, Alphonse." The page left it, but if ever an Alphonse carried plain Bill in his face and figure, that page was the boy. "I have ventured to call, ma'am," said Kate, after a few seconds of awkward silence, "from having seen your advertisement." "Yes," replied Mrs. Wititterly, "one of my people put it in the paper. Yes." "I thought, perhaps," said Kate, modestly, "that if you had not already made a final choice, you would forgive my troubling you with an application." "Yes," drawled Mrs. Wititterly again. "If you have already made a selection—" "Oh dear no," interrupted the lady. "I am not so easily suited. I really don't know what to say. You have never been a companion before, have you?" Mrs. Nickleby, who had been eagerly watching her opportunity, came dexterously in before Kate could reply. "Not to any stranger, ma'am," said the good lady, "but she has been a companion to me for some years. I am her mother, ma'am." "Oh," said Mrs. Wititterly, "I apprehend you." "I assure you, ma'am," said Mrs. Nickleby, that I very little thought at one time that it would be necessary for my daughter to go out into the world at all, for her poor dear papa was an independent gentleman, and would have been at this moment, if he had but listened in time to my constant entreaties. Dear mama,' said Kate, in a low voice. 'My dear Kate, if you will allow me to speak,' said Mrs. Nickleby, 'I shall take the liberty of explaining to this lady ' 'I think it is almost unnecessary, mama.' And notwithstanding all the frowns and winks with which Mrs. Nickleby intimated that she was going to say something which would clench the business at once, Kate maintained her point by an expressive look, and for once Mrs. Nickleby was stopped upon the very brink of an oration. 'What are your accomplishments?' asked Mrs. Wititterly, with her eyes shut. Kate blushed as she mentioned her principal acquirements, and Mrs. Nickleby checked them all off, one by one, on her fingers, having calculated the number before she came out. Luckily, the two calculations agreed, so Mrs. Nickleby had no excuse for talking. 'You are a good temper?' asked Mrs. Wititterly, opening her eyes for an instant, and shutting them again. 'I hope so,' rejoined Kate. 'And have a highly respectable reference for everything, have you?' Kate replied that she had, and laid her uncle's card upon the table. 'Have the goodness to draw your chair a little nearer, and let me look at you,' said Mrs. Wititterly. 'I am so very near sighted that I can't quite discern your features.' Kate complied, though not without some embarrassment, with this request, and Mrs. Wititterly took a languid survey of her countenance, which lasted some 2 or 3 minutes. 'I like your appearance,' said that lady, ringing a little bell. 'Alphonse, request your master to come here.' The page disappeared on this errand, and after a short interval, during which not a word was spoken on either side, opened the door for an important gentleman of about 38, of rather plebeian countenance, and with a very light head of hair, who leant over Mrs. Wititterly for a little time, and conversed with her in whispers. 'Oh,' he said, turning round, 'yes, this is a most important matter. Mrs. Wititterly is of a very excitable nature, very delicate, very fragile, a hothouse plant, an exotic.' 'Oh, Henry, my dear,' interposed Mrs. Wititterly. 'You are, my love, you know you are. One breath,' said Mr. W., blowing an imaginary feather away. 'Whew! You're gone.' The lady sighed. 'Your soul is too large for your body,' said Mr. Wititterly. 'Your intellect wears you out. All the medical men say so. You know that there is not a physician who is not proud of being called in to you. What is their unanimous declaration? "My dear doctor," said I to Sir Tumley Snuffim in this very room, the very last time he came, "my dear doctor, what is my wife's complaint? Tell me all. I can bear it. Is it nerves?" "My dear fellow," he said, "be proud of that woman. Make much of her. She is an ornament to the fashionable world, and to you. Her complaint is soul. It swells, expands, dilates. The blood fires, the pulse quickens, the excitement increases. Whoo!" Here Mr. Wititterly, who, in the ardour of his description, had flourished his right hand to within something less than an inch of Mrs. Nickleby's bonnet, drew it hastily back again, and blew his nose as fiercely as if it had been done by some violent machinery. "You make me out worse than I am, Henry," said Mrs. Wititterly, with a faint smile. "I do not, Julia, I do not," said Mr. W. "The society in which you necessarily move, from your station, connection, and endowments, is one vortex and whirlpool of the most frightful excitement. Bless my heart and body, can I ever forget the night you danced with the baronet's nephew at the election ball at Exeter? It was tremendous." "I always suffer for these triumphs afterwards," said Mrs. Wititterly. "And for that very reason," rejoined her husband, "you must have a companion in whom there is great gentleness, great sweetness, excessive sympathy, and perfect repose." Here both Mr. and Mrs. Wititterly, who had talked rather at the Nicklebys than to each other, left off speaking, and looked at their two hearers with an expression of countenance which seemed to say, what do you think of all this?